Miriam had a system. Every morning she arrived at the office 12 minutes early. Not 10, not 15, 12. She made her coffee in the break room before anyone else got there, so she didn't have to make small talk over the machine. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She put her headphones in, not because she was listening to anything, but because headphones tell the world do not approach without requiring you to say it out loud. She had been doing this for 6 years. 6 years of arriving 12 minutes early. 6 years of headphones. 6 years of watching other people get recognized, promoted, celebrated, mentioned in company-wide emails, taken to lunch by management, handed opportunities the way you hand someone a glass of water, casually, without ceremony, without any awareness that the person on the other side of the room has been thirsty for a very long time. She had her desk, third from the window. The window seat belonged to Derek, her manager. The one next to his belonged to Paul, who had been at the company 4 years less than Miriam and had already been promoted twice. The desk beside Paul's had a rotating cast of new hires who always seemed to receive more orientation, more hand-holding, more genuine interest from leadership in their first 3 weeks than Miriam had received in 6 years combined. And then there was Miriam's desk. It looked like the desk of someone who had already given up or had never started. No photos, no plants, no cute motivational prints or funny mugs with sarcastic sayings. Just a monitor, a keyboard, a small brass owl she had bought herself the day she didn't get promoted the second time, and a notepad she refilled every 6 weeks from the supply closet. She did not decorate because she had learned, slowly and without anyone meaning to teach her, that decorating your desk was a declaration. It said, "I am here, I am staying, this space belongs to me." And every time she had made a small declaration, every time she had shown up fully, offered an idea, raised her hand, sent the email, something in the room had quietly rejected it. Not with cruelty, never with cruelty. Just with the mild, indifferent refusal of a machine that doesn't register your input. So she stopped decorating. She kept the owl because it wasn't decoration. It was a reminder, a small, silent, watching thing. She wasn't entirely sure what it was reminding her of. Maybe just that she had survived the second time, too. The first time she was overlooked, she thought it was a mistake. That is the thing nobody tells you about being ignored. The first few times, you genuinely believe it's accidental, an oversight, a scheduling conflict, a miscommunication. You tell yourself that if you just do the work well enough, clearly enough, loudly enough on paper, someone will notice. The noise you make in spreadsheets and documents and carefully worded proposals will eventually travel across whatever invisible distance exists between you and the people who make decisions. She was 28 when she joined Caldwell & Partners. She came from a smaller firm where she had been, by most accounts, excellent. She had a portfolio of regional campaigns that had performed in the top 15% of the industry. She had a reputation for statistical analysis that was, in the quiet language of professional compliments, described as unusually thorough. She accepted the job at Caldwell because it was bigger, more resources, more room to grow. Her mother had called her the night she signed the offer letter and said, "Baby, they are lucky to have you," and Miriam had believed her. She was still believing her at the 1-year mark when she submitted her first campaign concept for the Consumer Wellness Division and watched it get absorbed into a team ideation process and come back out the other side with Derek's name on it. She told herself, this happens, teams share credit, it's collaborative. She wasn't going to be one of those people who kept a spreadsheet of who contributed what and waved it around at review time. That was petty. She was not petty. At the 2-year mark, she applied for a senior strategist role that opened up internally. She had more relevant experience than anyone else who applied. She had better numbers. She had a recommendation from a client, an unsolicited one, which is the only kind worth anything, that described her work as the reason we renewed our contract. They gave the role to a man named Craig, who had been there 14 months and who, to his credit, was perfectly competent. He was also very comfortable in meetings. He laughed easily. He remembered people's golf handicaps and their kids' names and their opinions on the football game last weekend. He had a gift for making every person in the room feel like the most interesting person in the room. Miriam understood this. She understood that likability was a skill, and that she was, objectively, less skilled at it than Craig. She accepted that. She just didn't accept that likability should outrank evidence, that a smile and a golf handicap should carry more weight than 6/4 of performance data. She wrote this in her journal the night she found out. Just that. Then she closed the journal and didn't open it again for 2 months. By year 3, she had a new system on top of the old system. She documented everything, not in a paranoid way, not in the way of someone building a legal case, more in the way of someone who has realized that their memory is the only official record that exists of what they actually contribute, and who has decided to be meticulous about it. She had a folder on her personal hard drive, not the company server, her hard drive, that contained every project she had worked on, dates, her specific contribution, the outcome. If it had been presented publicly and her name had not appeared, she noted that too. Not angrily, just factually, the way a scientist notes an anomaly in the data. Interesting. Filing it. The folder was 63 files deep by the end of year 3. She told no one about the folder. Not her colleagues, not her mother, not her closest work friend, a woman named Adaize from the finance team, who was the only person in the entire building who had ever walked past Miriam's desk and said, without any particular agenda, "I really like your owl," and then waited for an actual response, as if the response mattered. Adaize was the one person Miriam ever came close to telling. But close is not the same as telling. Year 4 was the year of the segmentation model. Miriam spent 8 weeks building it. It started as a response to a brief that had been given to the whole team, a vague instruction from the executive level to better understand regional consumer behavior in the Q3 cohort. Most people on the team glanced at the brief and continued with their existing work. A few sent back preliminary ideas in a group email chain that quickly devolved into everyone agreeing with the most recent thing that had been said. Miriam went home and built a model. She is not going to pretend it was easy. It was not easy. She pulled publicly available census data and cross-referenced it with purchase behavior from 3 years of anonymized client records, which required permissions she had to request through 3 separate departments. She built a weighting system for demographic variables that she had seen referenced in academic literature but never applied at this scale in a commercial context. She tested it against historical campaigns and found that it predicted performance variation with a margin of error that was, by industry standards, quietly remarkable. She brought it to Derek in a one-on-one meeting, a 20-minute slot on a Tuesday afternoon. He looked at it for 4 minutes and then said, "This is really solid, Miriam. Let me think about how to deploy it strategically." She said, "Of course." She walked back to her desk with her headphones in, not listening to anything. 3 weeks later, Derek presented the model to the executive team. He called it a team-developed resource. The slides used her data, her methodology, her language, including a phrase she was almost certain she had invented, a specific way of describing cohort drift that she had never seen in any industry publication, and which had come to her at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night when she was eating cereal and staring at her laptop. She was not in the meeting. She found out about it the same way she found out about most things, a forwarded email recap that arrived 2 hours after the fact. She read the recap. She read the phrase, her phrase. She closed the email. She opened her documentation folder. She added the entry. Date, model name, deployment context, attribution. Derek Callum, presented as team-developed resource. Her name did not appear in the executive summary. She closed the folder. She picked up her coffee, which was cold. She drank it anyway. People ask, later, why she didn't say something then. They ask it the way people ask why someone didn't leave a bad situation sooner, which is to say, they ask it with the full benefit of hindsight and the comfortable distance of someone who has never been inside that particular room. Here is what it is like inside that room. You are 6 years into a job. You are good at the job. The job is not actively making you miserable, it is doing something more subtle, something harder to name, something that operates below the threshold of anything you could explain to HR without sounding either paranoid or dramatic. You have no single incident that constitutes an offense. You have 63 files of accumulated evidence that constitutes a pattern. But a pattern is not an incident, and the corporate world does not have a good system for processing patterns. You also have, underneath everything, the fear. Not the fear of being fired. Not the fear of conflict. Exactly. The fear that is much quieter and much more corrosive than either of those. The fear that maybe they are right. Maybe you are as invisible as they are treating you. Maybe you have been performing excellence in a key that nobody else can hear. Maybe the problem is not that they are missing you. Maybe the problem is that there is less to miss than you believe. This fear does not announce itself. It does not arrive dramatically. It seeps. It works its way into the gaps between confidence and evidence. It makes you second-guess the very data you collected because you collected it yourself. And who are you to trust your own ledger? She did not say something then because she was not entirely sure she had earned the right to. She needed more time to be sure. She ran out of time before she got there. The quarterly all-hands meeting was held on a Thursday in March. Miriam wore her gray blazer. She had 3 work blazers, the gray, the navy, and a dark green one she had bought on sale and almost never wore because it felt slightly too optimistic. The gray was reliable. It said, "I am here to work. I am taking this seriously. I do not require anything from you." She sat in the 3rd row of chairs. Not at the back, where you were invisible but obviously trying to be. Not at the front, where you were visible but under pressure to perform attentiveness for 2 hours straight. The 3rd row was the professional sweet spot, present enough to be considered engaged, removed enough to have a moment of private thought if you needed one. Derek was at the front of the room. He always ran these meetings with the same loose, comfortable energy that she had always found slightly extraordinary to witness. He never seemed to think about how he was coming across. He just came across. There was something almost admirable about it, in the way that watching someone do something effortlessly is almost admirable even when the thing they are doing effortlessly is something you wanted. The meeting moved through its standard choreography. Updates from each division. Numbers that everyone already knew because they had been in the recap email. A slide about company culture initiatives that everyone received with the same professionally attentive expression and the same private indifference. Then slide 11. Miriam saw the title first. She had written that title. It was a slightly unusual phrase, behavioral drift mapping in regional consumer cohorts, and she had chosen it carefully because the standard industry term was cohort migration analysis, and she thought that phrase was imprecise, that it missed the temporal dimension, that drift was a better word because drift implies something gradual and directional rather than something sudden, and this distinction actually mattered if you were going to use the model correctly. She had written this in a footnote in the original document. The footnote was still in the slide deck. Her footnote. Derek's presentation. He was talking about the methodology. He was using her language. Not all of it, he had paraphrased in places, but the structure was hers. The logic chain was hers. The specific insight about Q3 cohort behavior in Midwestern markets was hers. Born from a Tuesday night and a bowl of cereal and a thought she'd had that she was almost certain no one else in this room had ever had, because she had never seen it anywhere else. She was watching the slide. She was not taking notes. Her notepad was open in her lap, but the pen was still. Derek said, "This is the kind of internally developed thinking that really sets us apart as a firm." Internally developed. She wrote nothing. She watched the graph. It was her graph. She had built it in a charting tool that she had taught herself over a weekend because the firm's standard charting software couldn't render the specific type of weighted scatterplot she needed. She had spent 4 hours on a Saturday learning the software. She could still remember the particular quality of the afternoon light in her apartment and the specific frustration of the tutorial video that buffered every 40 seconds. The graph was on a screen in a conference room with 43 people looking at it. Her name was not in the room. Christine Adler was the VP of Strategy. Miriam had interacted with her exactly 4 times in 6 years. Once in an elevator, once at the holiday party, once in a meeting where Miriam had presented data and Christine had said good work in the general direction of the table. Once, briefly, in the bathroom, which did not count as an interaction, but which Miriam had found notable because Christine had looked directly at her in the mirror and said, "I keep meaning to have you in for a proper chat." A sentence that had never materialized into an action. Christine was sitting 2 seats to Miriam's left. Miriam was aware of this in the way you become aware of something you are trying not to look at. She was looking at the graph. Derek was moving to his next point, transitioning smoothly, the way he always transitioned, with a particular hand gesture that implied the previous thing had been settled. Christine said, "Miriam." Just that. Her name. In the voice of someone who is retrieving something from a shelf. Miriam looked up. The room did something. Not a dramatic thing, just a minor reorganization of attention. The particular quality of a space when its ambient noise drops a half step. Christine said, "You were in the original working group on this, weren't you? Help me remember. Who actually ran point on the segmentation methodology?" It was a polite question. The kind of question that could be answered in many ways. The kind of question that, delivered in that tone, in that room, gave everyone including Derek a graceful path forward if they chose to take it. Miriam heard Derek begin to take the path. She heard the words, "the team really collaborated," begin to form in his mouth. She heard the first syllable, "the," and the slight breath before it, and she knew exactly what the next 12 words were going to be before he said them. She knew because she had heard a version of them before. At the 2-year mark. At the 3-year mark. In recap emails and meeting summaries and the specific passive voice of professional language that makes a person into a process. That turns Miriam built this over 8 weeks into "this was internally developed," which is technically true the way that calling the ocean a collection of hydrogen and oxygen is technically true. She heard the, and something moved in her chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something older than anger, and further down than anger. Something that had been sitting at the bottom of her for 6 years, getting incrementally heavier, and that arrived, now, at a particular weight that she did not know what to do with. Except one thing. She said, "I built it." Not loudly. She was not a loud person. Just clearly. "I built it over 8 weeks. The full methodology is documented in the internal research drive under my name. I can pull it up right now if that would be helpful." The room held its breath, the way rooms hold sounds that were louder than expected. Derek's water glass was halfway to his mouth. Christine was looking at her with an expression Miriam could not immediately classify. 41 other people were experiencing various configurations of the same 3 emotions: surprise, relief that it was not happening to them, and the particular discomfort of witnessing something honest in a context designed to prevent honesty. Nobody said anything for 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a very long time when 43 people are not talking. Then Christine said, "Good, thank you, Miriam." She wrote something down, and the meeting continued. That was it. No confrontation. No drama. No moment where the room erupted, or Derek was publicly shamed, or Miriam was lifted on anyone's shoulders. The meeting continued. Derek moved to slide 12. Someone's phone buzzed. The catered sandwiches sat on the side table getting mildly less fresh. The meeting continued, and then it ended, the way meetings do. And Miriam stood up, and she discovered that her hands were not completely steady. Not trembling, just not completely steady. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood waiting. Behind her she could hear the ambient sounds of the post-meeting break. The particular quality of 40 people being released from enforced attentiveness, the sound of chairs scraping and phones being checked, and voices resuming at their natural volume. She heard no one say her name. She got in the elevator alone. The doors closed. She is not going to describe exactly what the elevator felt like in those 13 seconds of descent. Not because she doesn't remember. She remembers with the sharpness of something that happens to you once, and settles immediately into permanent storage. But because some things do not belong to anyone but the person in the elevator. What she will say is this: it did not feel like triumph. It felt like something had been removed. Something she had been carrying so long that she had stopped noticing its weight, and now noticed its absence with an acuteness that was almost physical. Like when your ears pop on a plane, and you realize you had been hearing through a layer of pressure this whole time. She stood in the lobby for a moment. She pressed her thumb against the edge of her phone until she felt the corner of the case. A small, specific pressure, something to locate herself with. Then she went back upstairs and sat down at her desk. Her inbox had 3 new emails. One was automated. One was a meeting request from a client she had been managing for 2 years. The third was from Adeze in finance, sent 12 minutes ago, which read only, "I saw." Good. Miriam read the third email twice. Then she opened a new document. Not a work document. A personal one, saved to her hard drive, in the same folder as the 63 files. She titled it Work, What I Have Actually Done, and she began to write. She wrote everything. Not in anger, not in the voice of someone building a case, but in the plain voice of someone who has decided that the record needs to exist regardless of whoever reads it. The campaigns, the models, the research, the client relationships she had built and maintained and renewed through the patient, unglamorous work of being consistently reliable. The 18 months she had spent developing the firm's regional data framework, which was now used by every team in the company, and which was referred to in internal communications as our existing infrastructure, as if it had always been there, as if it had emerged fully formed from the walls. She wrote it all down. She wrote for 40 minutes, then an hour. She did not stop for coffee. She did not check her other emails. She wrote until she had documented every significant thing she had done in this building, and then she sat back and looked at the document, which was 11 pages long, and she thought, that is a person. That is what a person has done. And for the first time in a very long time she felt the particular clarity of recognizing yourself in something, of looking at evidence and thinking, yes, that is me, that is actually me, and I did not imagine it. She closed the document. She changed her screensaver. She had been using the default mountain, the one that comes preloaded on every computer, the mountain that belongs to no one, for 6 years. She opened her photos folder and found a picture she had taken in 2019 in Accra, where her grandmother lived. She had taken it at 5:30 in the morning, standing on a hill above the harbor. The light was coming across the water in long, flat lines, the way early morning light moves in coastal cities, and everything was gold and gray, and the air had that particular early quality of a world before it has started performing itself. She set it as the screensaver. She looked at it for a moment. The owl caught the office light on its brass side. She picked up her headphones, put them on, and opened the next project file on her list. 3 things happened in the weeks that followed. The first thing was small. 2 colleagues, people she had worked alongside for years with the pleasant cordial distance of people who share a space but not a life, began stopping by her desk. Not often, not dramatically, just occasionally, in the way of people who are revising a previous assessment and doing it quietly, without acknowledgement that any revision is occurring. Kemi from the creative team asked her opinion on a campaign strategy. Bode from client relations forwarded her a brief with a note that said, "You'd have good instincts on this." Small things. The kind of small things that are, in aggregate, the actual texture of professional life. The second thing was more complicated. Derek called her into his office. She sat across from him at the desk that was larger than her desk and felt, as she always did in that room, the particular physics of a space that has been arranged to communicate authority. She waited. He said, "I wanted to check in with you after Thursday." She said, "I appreciate that." He said, "I want you to know the segmentation model. We always intended to credit the source properly in the full documentation." She looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been examining for a very long time and have finally decided you understand. She said, "That's good to hear. I'll make sure my name is in the documentation going forward." Not a question, not a request, a statement of future fact. Something moved across Derek's face. She catalogued it and moved on. The third thing happened 6 weeks after the meeting. Christine Adler's assistant sent her a calendar invite. A 30-minute slot. The title, Introduction/Strategy Chat. Not the proper chat from the bathroom, which had floated for years without landing. A specific, scheduled 30-minute slot with a title and a conference room number. She accepted the invitation. She wore the dark green blazer. She is still at Caldwell and Partners. She knows people expect a different ending, an exit, a dramatic departure to a better firm, or to striking out on her own, or to some kind of culminating confrontation that would function as narrative justice. She knows that the convention of this kind of story requires a before and an after separated by something large and permanent. But this is not that kind of story. Or rather, it is exactly that kind of story, just told honestly. What actually changes, when something changes, is rarely the external architecture. The desk is still the desk. The building is still the building. Derek is still Derek, which is to say he is still exactly as complicated as he always was, and as most people are. Not a villain, not a predator, not someone who woke up each morning and deliberately planned to erase a person's contributions. Just someone who had, over a very long time, benefited from a system that made erasure easy, and who had not asked himself the questions that would have made it harder. What changes is interior. It is the thing in the elevator, the feeling of something being removed. The habit of arriving 12 minutes early with headphones in as a shield, the screensaver that belonged to everyone and therefore to no one. The impulse to make herself small enough to fit in the space that was available rather than requiring the space she actually needed. These things do not all change at once. They change the way erosion works, which is to say, slowly, without announcement, and in the direction of less obstruction. She started eating lunch away from her desk. Not every day, some days, enough days that the habit of isolation became less fixed, became something she did sometimes rather than something she did always, which is a different thing entirely. She started signing her work, not differently than before. Her name had always been on her documents in the technical sense, in the file metadata, in the author field, but she started putting it in the places it was visible, in the header of presentations, in the introductory paragraph of reports. She stopped writing in the passive voice, the professional voice that says, "It was determined," and findings suggest, as if findings determine themselves, as if no particular mind was the instrument of determination. She wrote, "I found." She wrote, "My analysis shows." She said, in rooms, with her actual voice, "I built this." And the extraordinary thing, the thing that took her longest to understand, is that this was not, in the end, particularly difficult to survive. The rooms did not collapse. The people did not recoil. There was discomfort, yes, the particular discomfort of a system encountering a body that is no longer agreeing to the system's terms. But discomfort is not the same as destruction. You can survive discomfort. You can walk through it with your gray blazer on and your hands not quite steady and come out the other side, still you, still here. She thinks about her mother's expression sometimes. Still water runs deep. She has decided she prefers the water moving. There is something she wants to say about the owl. She still has it. It still sits on her desk, catching the office light in the same way it always has. She has never moved it, and she does not plan to. But she has changed what it reminds her of. It used to be a reminder of survival, of the second rejection, the third overlooking, the quiet accumulation of being passed through. It was a memorial in brass to the version of herself that kept going anyway. Now it is something else. It is a reminder that she bought it herself, that she chose it, carried it to the office, placed it on the corner of the desk with her own hand, that in a room full of furniture and equipment that belonged to the company, and to Derek, and to the building, and to the lease agreement, and to nobody, this one small thing was hers. She had made a declaration after all. She just hadn't known how to read it yet. At the end of the day, she puts her laptop to sleep. She gathers her things the same way she always has, methodically, without hurry, in the specific order that has become its own kind of ritual over 6 years. Laptop, notebook, pen, keys, phone. She pauses at the screen before she stands. The screensaver has come on, the way it does when the computer has been still long enough. The harbor in Accra, the long flat light, everything gold and gray, and full of the particular stillness of a morning that hasn't started yet. She looks at it the way she looked at her own 11-page document, the way you look at something and recognize yourself in it. She stands up, she picks up her bag, she does not put her headphones in until she is outside the building, That is the change. That is the whole of it. That is what 12 seconds in an elevator and 2 words spoken into a quiet room can do, if they are the right 2 words and you have been holding them long enough. She walks out. The city is what it is. The evening is what it is. She is who she is. She knows it now.